Today's gospel reading comes from the book of Mark. The book of Mark is the first gospel that was written. In the gospel of Mark, it really emphasizes Jesus as the Son of Man, the Son of humanity, the Son of God, the Son who is God, who must suffer as humans suffered. It is a way of talking about God enduring our suffering. It is also one of the less orderly Gospels. It is written specifically for oral reading and traditionally would have been read all at once as a continuous whole. The Gospel of Mark was also written by someone who was a good storyteller. If you read through this Gospel in its entirety, you'll notice there are more psychological elements to it, more about the situation of people. This may be because there were more firsthand accounts given to the author because of its earlier date of being written, or there may be some elements that were added to enrich the story by the author. Mark was written to a mixed church of Jews and Gentiles, speakers who spoke both Greek and Aramaic, and likely people who had studied the Old Testament. The book of Mark doesn't go into much explanation of the significance of some of the connections to the Old Testament, some of which we'll look at today. These are people, though, who had known of God, of the Jewish God Yahweh. They may have not thought of their identity as people who are transitioning to a new religion, to a whole new thing, but maybe thought of themselves as people living separate from the rest of the world, enduring something different, knowing something different. In this collection that we find in Mark is a lot of emphasis on Jesus as Messiah. This is a very sophisticated story written by someone who is likely a pastor or a teacher of a church, and someone who is much more concerned with us learning about discipleship than about the disciples specifically, about living in a way of mutual servanthood, about leaving your own life, your old life, to have a new life in God through Jesus Christ. We will now hear this text from Mark chapter 13, beginning in verse 24. A section often referred to as the Little Apocalypse. Listen for the word of the Lord. But in those days after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore, keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come in the evening or at midnight or at cockcrow or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. As I mentioned earlier, our theme this week in Advent is those who dream stay awake. And as you can hear in this text, it comes directly from it, this recurring theme of awakeness. So we enter into Advent, this season about waiting and watching, but also about things being revealed. Last week, we celebrated Christ the King Sunday. We read the text from Matthew that was about the last parable before the beginning of the events that led to Jesus' death. But the Gospel of Mark, it begins very differently from Matthew. We've been in Matthew for a while, so I really want to point out some of these differences as we start approaching Mark, as we'll continue through Mark for quite a while. Mark begins with the adult John the Baptist and adult Jesus. There is no birth story in Mark, no prologue. So why read this for Advent? Why read this text when we are talking about a time when baby Jesus is coming? Do we read a gospel that starts with the adult Jesus? And why read this gospel when our theme is those who dream stay awake? Advent is not the celebration of a baby. Advent is about the celebration of God. Advent is the celebration of God with us, Emmanuel. As we celebrated last week with Christ the King Sunday, Advent is about the continual promise between God and God's people. So this little apocalypse text, looking ahead to the coming of Christ. Here in Mark, just like we read last week in Matthew, is the last teaching of Jesus, right before the events that lead to his death. And what comes in chapter 13, right before what we read today, is one of the most literal parts of this gospel. It is a description of what happened with the fall of the temple in Jerusalem, just a few years before this gospel was written. In this, the author describes wars, nations against nations, siblings against siblings, and even such specific wording as, when you see the desolating sacrilege set up where it ought not to be, then those in Judea will flee to the mountains. The one on the housetop must not go down or enter the house to take anything away. The one in the field must not go back to get a coat. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing. Pray that it not be winter. Mark is speaking to these people who have just suffered a tremendous blow. Their economic infrastructure, with the fall of the temple in Jerusalem, has been shaken. Their business world is topsy-turvy. Their worshipers have been sent into the mountains. They struggle. And winter would likely have made it worse. Does this speak to us today? At a time when our economy, when our small businesses, when our people are suffering, when a tremendous blow has hit us, does this speak to us today? So what is Mark saying to that community? What is he saying to us? This is written approximately 40 years after the death of Jesus, 40 years that were a time of some of the greatest violence and bloodshed in Israel's history. They culminated in a Roman victory over the Jewish nation. And here we have Jesus saying, stay awake. Right now, as we enter into Advent, we need a pause. We need a pause to recognize that we are entering a season of celebration at the end of a very long, hard year. This week, I said to Brendan, do you realize it's been 4 months since we arrived in San Pedro? And his response was, does it feel like it's only been 4 months? It doesn't. Because no matter what, this has been a long year. And this text is a reminder to all of us who have felt the weight of this year that there is hope. This text is called a little apocalypse. Apocalypse just means something being revealed. What is it? What is it being revealed? How is God revealing God's self right now? That's the bigger apocalyptic question. In this text, we hear about a tearing of heaven, a boundary crossing, things that are being exposed that we have never seen before. Things that lead into Mark 14, those events that lead to the death of Jesus. And we can think of Advent as a celebration of God coming to us in history, God coming in mystery, and God coming in majesty. Because those who dream stay awake. So, what does this text mean for the first readers? What else would they have known, and how do we connect with them and with that? From Isaiah chapter 64, we hear, "Oh, that you would tear open the heavens and come down." Again, that tearing. "So that the mountains would quake at your presence. And when fire kindles brushwood and the fire causes water to boil, to make your name known to your adversaries, so that the nations might tremble at your presence. We have all become like one who is unclean, and all our righteous deeds are like a filthy cloth. We all fade like a leaf, and our iniquities, like the wind, take us away." That phrase, "we have all become like one who is unclean." If ever there is a year where we have been urged to behave as if all are unclean, it is 2020. This is a year of watching for germs around every corner, of a literal uncleanliness. This is also a year of things fading away like the leaves. Things have changed. Things have been heavy. Those who dream stay awake. This wording from Mark about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son. But beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. And how 2020 does that feel? Be alert, be vigilant at all times, be aware of everything, of all the things that plague us. How 2020 does that feel? But also, as we enter into this celebration of Advent this year, we can remember the opening lines in Corinthians. "Grace to you and peace from God and the Lord Jesus Christ. I give thanks to my God always for you, because of the grace of God that has been given you in Jesus Christ. In every way you have been enriched in him in speech and knowledge of every kind, just as the testimony of Christ has been strengthened among you, so that you are not lacking in any spiritual gift as you wait for the revealing of our Lord Jesus Christ." In this text, we are reminded that the testimony of Christ is strengthened among us. We are reminded that in every way we have been enriched in him, in speech and knowledge of every kind, of Bible studies over Zoom, of worship over Facebook, of all the ways that we give thanks to God for each and every one of us. We are not lacking. We are waiting, because those who dream stay awake. One quote that I read from a commentator, Jill Duffield, said, Advent slips easily into sentimentality and cheap grace. I want to read that one more time. Advent slips easily into sentimentality and cheap grace. But we need both God to be with us and God to be on the side of the oppressed and vulnerable. What Advent does is urges us to consider if Jesus does return, if we truly believe that the return of Jesus is coming between now and next Sunday, in what state will we be found? In what ways will I be a reflection of the character of Jesus? And in the ways that I know I will fall short, what do I need to do differently? And am I at least willing to try? What this text is telling us is the world is about to pivot. And we need to be ready to turn in the direction that God is going to go. Remember in Isaiah, we read, Oh, that you would tear open the heavens and come down. Make your name known so the nations might tremble at your presence. Last week also, we talked about the parable, the presence in front of the nations, the King of all the nations. We also talked a little about our artificial boundaries we set up around ourselves, these boundaries that keep us from moving towards Jesus, boundaries that keep us from feeding the hungry, from providing shelter or clothing as often as we could. As we enter into Advent, we are reminded again, we are in the middle of a circle. We are in the middle of a circle in the midst of a fallen world, a circle in the middle of a world that greatly needs Jesus. We are looking from our circle out in one direction. Which direction is God going to go? When we stay awake, we are ready to turn towards God. But staying awake isn't just a passive awakeness. It is of dreaming. It is of holding on to the hope that comes in Jesus Christ. It is in holding on to the promise that we have. And so now let us return back to the beginning of our text from Mark that we heard today. In those days after that suffering, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. And the stars will be falling from heaven and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. The Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Therefore, keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake.